All right, we're here today with Frank Jones of Jenison, Michigan. Today's date is January 29th, 2015, and the interviewer is Adam Jones with the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Now, Frank, to begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born February 15, 1950.
Okay. And where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Grand Rapids.
All right. And now, what'd your parents do for a living?
My mother was a stay-at-home mother with 7 kids, and my dad was a supervisor at General Motors.
Okay. Now, did you attend high school in Grand Rapids?
Yes, several.
Several. All right.
I went to school, or South High School, and when they closed South High School, I went to Central.
Okay.
South was where President Ford went to school, and Central is where Betty Ford went to school.
Well, how about that? And I'm assuming you graduated from Central.
Central, yes.
All right. When did you graduate from there?
1970.
1970. All right. So you're growing up during the 60s. There's a few major things going on, one of which, of course, is the escalation in Vietnam. Now, how aware were you of that growing up?
Very aware.
Very aware. Did you pay attention to the news and the developments?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I was especially aware because that's when the draft was going on, and I was looking at how long other conflicts have lasted, and thinking, well, by the time they get to me, it should be over with.
Yeah, it's a common thing that I've heard among a lot of guys saying, like, well, hopefully by the time I get there, it'll be done.
Yeah. And unfortunately, it wasn't.
And then were you also aware, aside from that, there's also the civil rights movement. How aware were you of that?
Very aware.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was very aware. I went to predominantly black school. South High was probably, let's say, 85 to 90% black. And I wasn't aware of prejudice until South High, and it wasn't with the upper grades, it was with the lower grades that there was this prejudice.
Okay.
That, why do you dislike us? Why do you hate us? And I, the whole slavery thing is, yeah, it happened, shame on us, but it's over with,
Right.
It's water under the bridge, forget about it.
Yeah.
You can't change the past.
Right. All right. So, you graduated from high school in June 1970?
Yeah.
All right. Now, after that, what happens next? Do you go to college, go to work?
I started to work for a cousin because I knew that my number was 69,
Okay.
or 68, I think it was 69.
Now, what did that mean?
That means that I was definitely going to go to Vietnam. That's what it meant.
Okay.
They had a lottery system, and they went from 1 to 300 or something like that, and this 1 through, whatever, 1 through 100, we're going to go.
Okay.
And then 100 200, that was the next batch to go.
Okay.
And if they needed them, 200 to 300 would go. But there was a slim chance.
Right.
So everybody was hoping to get a high number.
That makes sense.
So I got 69. I was blessed.
All right. So when do you get drafted?
1970.
1970. Like,
Well, actually 71.
oh, 1971.
I think that's what it says in there.
Let's see. Well, on your card that you gave me, it said August 1st, 1970 is when it ordered you to report for
Yeah.
induction.
Yeah, that's 1970.
Okay.
But it wasn't until, yeah, I guess that would be August, because I only worked that summer, yeah. And that was for a cousin who owned when I say construction, it was road service construction.
Okay.
So, and I worked there that summer, and I told my fiance at the time that, you know, we were engaged, and I said, there's no way I'm getting married going to Vietnam. You know, there's no way I'm gonna leave a widow, you know,
Yeah.
being married and, you know, within 6 months, you know, leave her widow. I just wasn't gonna do that.
Right. Right. Yeah. How did your family take it when you got drafted?
They were upset. My grandfather was especially upset. My grandfather and I were very close. And when it came time for me to get on the bus to go to Detroit, he couldn't see me on the bus. He went around the corner and waved to me and saluted, and that broke me up. It's one of those things, you know.
Yeah, of course.
As much as I was against the war, there's a certain amount of pride and family pride, if you will, that's the reason why you went.
Okay.
Not because you were going to save the country, because we weren't doing that. We weren't defending our country. We weren't defending basically South Vietnam. You know, we were doing the fighting, but the Vietnamese didn't care who were, who was there. The French couldn't do it. What made them think we were going to do it?
Exactly. On that high tide of after World War II. So you had no real inclination of joining the military after high school, anything like that? No. Now you mentioned going to Detroit. Was that for your Army physical?
No, that was, that was for the Army the induction physical, and
Okay.
make sure that everything was okay. And that was a joke in itself. They were inducting probably 200 guys a day to Detroit. You know, some of them brought files and briefcases full of notes and letters from doctors and saying why they shouldn't go. And you know, I had issues why I shouldn't go, but they disregarded those until I went into jump school, and I woke up one morning, and this is midway through jump school, and you do a lot of running in jump school. You ran everywhere. And couldn't walk, let alone run. And you were allowed to miss 3 hours of jump school without being recycled, which means without starting all over again. So I had a couple of guys, you know, walk me through, and we did whatever we could do. You know, I rode in the Jeep. When we got back to camp, I went to the infirmary, and this young doctor, who I was a good friend with, got really upset. I had no idea why. He says, "There's no way I should have been in the service in the first place." He said I had a extra growth or hinge in my hip that could give, and then I would, you know, I would be a sitting duck, or I would cause, you know, a group of people to be a sitting duck, but they overlooked that. So that's when I got my permanent profile. And it said that there was no running, jumping, stooping, or anything. I couldn't do anything.
Okay.
So I didn't get recycled. Fort Benning, I went to a different group, became the walking wounded, so to speak, and pulled guard duty, and for the company commander, and you go through, and the best dressed, the best, you know, cleanest rifle, best polished shoes, the best blouse pants, the best pressed shirt. You know, you meet all these criteria. If you did this like 4 times in a row, you didn't have to pull guard duty anymore. So, yeah, it was a big deal to get ready for guard duty.
Oh yeah.
So I managed to get there, and then the last thing was this, a good soldier always has a buck in his pocket. And I had a buck in my pocket. And I beat out the other guy that was, you know.
I was competing for that.
Yeah.
So basically, you shouldn't have even been in the Army anyway.
Yeah.
So backing up a little bit, when do you begin your basic training, and where was that at?
Fort Knox.
Okay.
And that's where it all started. You know, that's right after I went through my physical. They put me on a bus, and we drove to Fort Knox.
Okay. Now, what was your first impression of the military when you get to Fort Knox?
I'm here, you know, might as well make the best of it, yeah. So, basically, you know, I wouldn't want especially in a time like that, or a time like this, for my sons or any of my nephews to be in the service, but it was a learning experience. It's not a time that I regret. I wouldn't want to see my kids go through it at the time that I went through, but I don't regret being in the service.
Right, right. So how did you adjust to military living?
Pretty good.
Yeah, did you kind of know what to expect going in?
Yeah, well, no, because you've never been there and it was all new. And the only thing I was told going in is never volunteer for anything, you know?
Okay.
You just, which is true. Never volunteer for anything. Because there's always going to be somebody that's going to raise their hand, and you never know what it's going to be for. Now, it could be anything from serving the officers at dinner time, or to shoveling shit, you know, literally. And so you never volunteered. I never volunteered. If they chose me, then
You do it.
then you do it.
Now, what was the training? What did it consist of?
Running, shooting, the M15, the M16, the 45.
Okay.
But that was all, you know, those were fun things to do.
Now, who was training you? I mean, I've heard from other veterans that during basic training they're actually being trained by instructors that had already been to Vietnam. Did you know if any of your drill sergeants had been there?
Yeah. A lot of them were career soldiers, and so what they were doing is getting back from Vietnam and training.
Hey.
Hi.
All right, so we were just talking about your drill sergeants were also Vietnam veterans as well. They were career soldiers.
Yeah.
All right.
And it's kind of like a stopover, you know, before they get back into the real life, you know,
Right.
you know, civilian. When I say civilian life back home.
Right.
So.
Now, since they had been to Vietnam already, did they offer any kind of advice to you guys during basic training?
Yeah, a lot of it was tongue in cheek. The one thing that I was told is that when we were there, the bunkers were so bad. Don't go into the bunkers. You know, if you have incoming.
Okay.
And just, you know, cover your ass. You know, just make sure that you always have somebody with you when you go out. You never want to just wander out by yourself at night, you know.
Right.
And even if you're in a safe zone, it's never really safe. When I got to Vietnam, well, let me back up. When I was at Fort Sill, I became the property book clerk.
Okay.
And I worked for this captain, and I got to live off base.
All right.
And that's when I found this out, and I knew that I wasn't going any place, that I wasn't going to Vietnam. I called Linda up and said, guess what? You can make plans to get married if you want. I said, because I'm not going anywhere. So we made plans from Oklahoma to Grand Rapids to get married.
Okay.
I came home, I had 30-day leave. 3 days before the wedding, they changed my profile from a permanent profile to a temporary profile. And along with that, gave me orders to go to Vietnam. And within that 30 days. So they kind of screwed me over both ways. I mean, and what can you do in 3 days? You can't cancel a wedding.
No.
So
So go on with it.
ended up having the wedding. And drove back down to Oklahoma, packed up the stuff that we had down there, put it in a U-Haul, and drove back to Michigan.
All right.
And go ahead.
I was just gonna say. Now, was that after all of your training was done?
Yeah.
Okay. So, again, we'll back up a little bit. How long was your basic training?
Oh, what was it? 6 weeks?
Yeah, it sounds about right. It's usually
Yeah.
6-8 weeks.
Yeah, you're talking a long time ago.
Well, it's all right. It's all right. So you get done with the basic training. Now, did you go on to any kind of specialized training?
Well, you go to individual advanced training, which I went to Fort Polk, Louisiana,
Okay.
and that was different. That was a different type of training, and you had to go through how things are going to be different in Vietnam. How to camouflage and how to set up, how to look for booby traps and tripwires and other stuff like that.
Yeah, I've heard of the Tiger Land training down in Fort Polk.
Yeah.
Did you notice when you finally did get to Vietnam that training in Fort Polk had?
Very little to do with.
Yeah.
It was training, but it wasn't what you really needed. You needed training like being there type training.
Yeah.
You know, setting off booby traps and seeing what happens to you. And they needed to show you movies like they did in driver's ed, you know, blood and gore. If you fuck up, this is what's gonna happen.
Right.
And, you know, there's a lot of things that, I guess I can't say that here. I just, you know, when I first got into Cameron Bay, you have to pull KP. Well, me and this guy, we were both in country, and we finished KP. We were probably the last two before we got done. And he says, "Do you want to do it, do me?" And I says, "Yeah, we can probably do that." The stuff over there back then was a lot different than it was stateside.
Okay.
So, I mean, which is, compared to now, was nothing. But anyway, we got a buzz on and I was going for a walk and I see these, you know, searchlights just starting to go all over the place. Holy shit. So I walked down to the bay. I says, "What's going on, man?" Well, somebody spotted VC in the wire. He says, "I think you better get back to your hood." I'm going, "Yeah, I think you're right." That was my very first experience.
First experience there. All right.
That was, but then, you know, there was that, and there were things that went on. I felt like radar when I finally got my position and as headquarters company clerk. So I had the ability, everything had to go through me.
Right.
You know, passes or promotions, leaves, R&Rs, you know, so.
So you just kind of controlled that and all the movement.
Yeah, all the companies, we were headquarters company, so we had B, C,
Usually,
Echo,
yeah, Delta and
Yeah.
Alpha.
yeah.
So again, jumping back, you mentioned something about jump school, airborne training. Now I'm sure that was after AIT, right?
Yeah,
And where was that? Actually, one quick question about AIT. How long was that?
I think it was a week or two shorter than basic.
Okay, so like 5.5, 6 weeks, something
6
like
weeks,
something like
probably.
that.
And basic was probably 8 weeks.
All right. And then where was jump school at?
Jump school was in Fort Benning, Georgia.
Okay. And what did that consist of?
Running.
Right.
That consisted of running everywhere. I did everything except jump out of the plane.
Okay, so you didn't get those 5 training jumps in.
No, because I got screwed up because of my hips
Right.
and my knees, and I never thought anything about it until I was discharged, and they asked if I had any significant health problem while I was in the service. And I says, well, I had this, you know, that's I thought was pretty significant, so I wrote that down. And when I got stateside, I got a letter telling me to go to Detroit. They want to reevaluate me. I was there, me and Linda were there for, Linda and I were there for the better part of 12 hours. Didn't say anything else. I went through all these tests. Probably a month and a half later, I get a letter in the mail saying that I was 25% disabled. So I didn't know what that meant. Well, anyway, I was getting like $25 a month. And I got that forever, and then it kept going up. The money kept going up. Then I guess I started getting $30 and $30. And I said, I'm having these problems. I've had both knees replaced, both hips replaced, right hip was replaced twice. And I says, I want to talk to somebody, this was before I had them all replaced. I wanted to talk to somebody that, because everybody, the last time I went to Kalamazoo for an evaluation, I had an Indian doctor that I couldn't understand. And he acted as though the money was coming out of his pocket. And he told me that there was nothing wrong with me and that I won't be getting any more disability than what I'm getting right now.
Oh.
And I says, well, I didn't come here to get more disability. What I came here for is, to find out why I'm still hurting and why I wake up and I can't walk. And he says, I know the games you guys play. And I was hot. I was so hot. So it was years and years. I stayed at 25%. And then Linda had a patient that told her, that's wrong, this guy should have never told you that. He worked for, he was a liaison for Vietnam vets with disabilities. And he gave her the name and number of a place where I should go. And I went there, and I applied for more disability. And within that time that I went to see her and put my application in and start to have all these problems, I ended up being 95% disabled.
Wow.
And she says, you missed out on a lot of money. I wish you would have come sooner. But from 25 to 95 is a big jump.
Oh yeah.
And it's a big jump in pay. So they, it's like, I have comes to the military, I don't trust the military. I don't trust the military as much as I trust the government. So, yeah, I guess you know how much I trust the government.
Yeah. Well, so backing up again. Sorry, I can keep jumping
That's
around.
fine. I can run off, so.
Oh no, it's fine. It's fine. Tape is cheap. So we get back. Now you talked about being at Fort Sill. Now when did that happen? Was that before that was before your deployment to Vietnam? It's after all your training. How did you wind up at Fort Sill?
My plan was to take as many training classes and special training to prolong me from going to Vietnam. I also, after AIT training, I was told, I took some kind of leadership test and was told that I was a candidate to go to West Point. Hindsight's always 20/20, but I was a candidate to go to West Point. And I, called Linda and I said, I got a chance to go to West Point. And she says, great. She says, after we're married, can we move down there? I said, well, I don't know. I haven't found out about it. Well, can't be married and go to West Point. And you have to, it's like a 11-year commitment. I don't want to be in the service for 11 years. I didn't want to be in the service for 2 years. So, I didn't do that. So I went to jump school. That, was 6 more weeks that I didn't have to go to Vietnam.
Right.
And then I was hoping after that to go to Green Beret training, which would have been another 6 to 8 weeks. So, I kept thinking of all these different
These options to
go to.
keep going. Yeah.
The longer you keep going, something may happen.
Yeah, eventually the war may be over before you even get there.
Yeah.
So what training did you do at Fort Sill then?
I did all the airborne training. I did everything except for jump out of a plane.
Okay.
I did see an old lifer because I think airborne training was $50 a month more on your paycheck.
Okay.
So you got these old guys who were lifer who wanted, that $50 a month more.
Oh yeah, exactly.
And so this old guy, when you are on the static line and you jump from the tower and you slide to the other end, you're supposed to spread eagle. This old guy, and I think he was 50 years old at that time, was coming down and he didn't spread eagle, and they told him to spread eagle, and he started hollering, spread eagle. Never spread eagle. He had a heart attack when and died on the static line on his way down.
Wow.
But I did everything that I could have done. That, like I said, the training, and I had a good time. I made my time in the Army a good time. pulled jokes and we were laughing. I had guys laughing in training one night so bad that they couldn't stop. And there was this guy from out east someplace, I want to say New York or the Bronx, someplace out there like that. He had a great accent. And we start talking in broken English, like Italian, a couple of Italians would. And we were laughing so hard that the drill sergeant came up. One was funny. We started to talk to him that way. And everybody was laughing, and they were laughing at him because he was getting pissed off. And we just kept going, which we probably should have stopped. Well, he says, okay, he says, I want all you flying dicks to get out in the sand pit. Okay, so we're all out there in our shorts and t-shirts, and he says, I want you guys to start doing the low crawl through the pit. It's muddy and chips, bark chips. He said, okay, I want you to do the low crawl back and forth. And we said, I'm doing it. And we were still laughing. We were laughing. I was at one end and this guy was at the other. And we were still talking to each other in broken English. And he says he didn't know what to do anymore. So he kind of just gave in. He says, okay, I want you to get in there and take a shower and go back there and hit the rack. And we did. We were so tired after laughing so hard. And we did. We went in and went to bed.
Now, the men that you were training with, did you know if it was the majority were draftees? Were they enlistees? Were they
More
reserve guard?
in jump school?
Oh, I mean, in basic training, AIT, jump school.
Well, most of them were draftees. If they weren't draftees, a lot of them were National Guards
Okay.
or reserves, Army Reserve.
Okay.
A lot of them joined up to those two organizations real fast when they found out what their number was,
Okay.
to avoid going over there. So,
Now, I mean, aside from just laughing too much, I think you could hardly call it a discipline issue. Did you notice any kind of discipline issues among draftees during training, or not really?
there were, depending, yeah, I noticed discipline issues. Some of them were, definitely called for. I mean, in basic training, that they gave this guy a towel party. And when you put a bar of soap either in a pillowcase or a towel, you start getting the guy with it. Because this guy, they couldn't stand him anymore. He stunk so bad. And he told him, if you don't take a shower, this is what's going to happen to you every night. He took a shower.
You guys done yet?
No, we still got
We got a lot to do.
we got a lot of ground to cover yet.
Oh.
Now, so you deploy out of Fort Sill.
Yeah.
When did you receive your orders to deploy? This would be in 71 by now. Do you remember what month, day, possibly?
When did I go out of Fort Sill? I came home for a little bit before I went to Fort Sill. Was that in the summer or the fall?
What?
When
Fort
I,
Sill's in Oklahoma.
yeah, when I left to go to Fort Sill. Or did I go right from Fort Sill? Or from
We
Fort?
came home and got married, went down there for about a month.
No, this is between jump school. From Fort Benning
I
to
don't know.
Fort Sill.
All
I
right.
don't know. I don't remember either. I don't remember if I had had a week's leave or not.
Okay. But it's probably about the summer, spring, summer 1971 that you receive orders to deploy.
Yeah.
Now, what's the process of getting you out to Vietnam?
Well, they fly you, they give you a plane ticket to Seattle. And I was in Grand Rapids, so I went from Grand Rapids to Chicago to Minnesota, from Minnesota to Seattle.
Okay.
And then they send everybody to Seattle, either Seattle or San Francisco.
Yeah, the Oakland replacement team.
So we left out of San Francisco, what did you say?
Yeah.
Seattle. And so I was in Seattle for about 3 or 4 days until they got everybody there. And that's when I got to see Carlos Santana for free. They were playing, and there was another big name group that was playing with them. And they had sold more tickets than they had room for. And they had people that were outside these gates that were just livid. So they started swinging on these gates, and all of a sudden these gates went down, and thousands of people rushed in. I mean, there was nothing they could
That
do.
would be fun, yeah.
So we went in there. That's the last thing I remember. And they showed airport before, while we were flying across, which, for not flying very much,
Yeah.
was not a good movie to see. I checked everybody, So, yeah.
All right, so you arrive. You said you arrived at Cameron Bay, and you talked about that first night there, where you had the VC and the wire. Now, did you know what unit you were going to join, going over, or was that assigned to you?
I knew.
You knew. Now, which unit were you going to join upon arrival?
I was already in the 101st.
All right, so you're going over with the 101st. So you get to Cameron Bay now. You said that you went up to Phu Bai.
Yeah,
What was the process of getting up there?
plane. Well, the thing was, you knew you were in the shit when you're flying into Vietnam. And actually 3 fighter jets come to escort you in to Vietnam. And and you can see them. You can see, can't see the one behind you, but there's 2 on each side of you and there's one behind you. And flying in to Vietnam, it's kind of like when you say flying into Ireland, it is, but it was so green and so it looked like green velvet. It was gorgeous. It was gorgeous until you landed. And it was trashy, but it was different. In Cameron Bay, when we got there and we were checking in, I was getting ready to get roughed up and go to Cameron Bay. And I thought, I'm going to Cameron Bay. I'm going out into the bush. Of course, nobody tells you anything. So I'm getting ready and I'm walking along this PSP and I hear somebody holler out, "Jones." Turn around. And it was the property book officer that was at Fort Sill. He was the headquarters officer in Phu Bai. He says, "Jones, do you know how to type?" He says, "If you tell me, do you know how to type?" He says, "If you know how to type," he says, "I got a job for you." Well, if you're typing, you really can't be out in the bush, right? "Yeah, I can type." He says, "Good. Yeah, you're going to be headquarters company clerk." So that's how I got the job, being headquarters company clerk. He changed my orders and
Now, when did that happen? Because
really just as
soon as you got
in country.
So did you get into the field at all during?
Oh yeah,
You did. Now could you talk a little bit about that?
yeah, I can. What was it? I then went and saw it, and I didn't go and see it.
We got about 5-6 minutes, and then I'll have to change tapes. So we were talking about going into the field.
Yeah, yeah. First time I went, I had a chance to carry a Prick 25, which is a radio, or an M50 machine gun.
Okay.
I didn't want to carry that heavy sucker. Besides, if you carry the radio, you get to carry a .45 pistol, and I thought that was cool. Yeah, I'll carry the radio. And everybody looked at me like that was crazy. What's the big deal? They just kind of shook their head. I put on this radio, stacked on my .45. I said, I'm ready to go. I'm cool. All of a sudden they undid the antenna. You know what? Blind! And it's like, holy shit, I'm a target. Needless to say, I didn't volunteer for that anymore. You know, like I said, the first thing
Yeah.
you do is never volunteer for
Right.
anything. Broke my own rule, but yeah. And then went out for another time, or that same time. I was, we were communicating back and forth. There was some VC that they were trying to pinpoint. And one thing in the Army you don't say is repeat. That means shoot all remaining rounds at the last coordinates that you were given. Now, nobody does, and you know, that could have been, 2 feet from, your base,
Right.
whatever. I got everybody get into my shit. I had people coming to me all over. I was a real popular guy. And after I said it, I knew what I had said. I mean, say it again over. Say it again over. That was a good day. And I know it was one time we went out, and had a guy hit a tripwire, but the minute he hit it, he must have knew it when he hit it, because he fell right to the ground. And the only thing that really happened is that he got shrapnel in his leg. Somehow he hit the ground, and he was very lucky, because it could have taken his leg off, or worse. Anyway, they met back to the base camp, and then we went to the med shed, and me and the doctor that I worked with ended up working on him, which was kind of neat. I mean, if you're not squeamish to anything like that, it's kind of. Comes over, the doctor comes over, come here, kiss me, bro. Say, feel that, feel how that went in. I got this thing, oh yeah. And then I got, seeing this blood and things on, and I'm going, I'm gonna have to step outside for a minute here. I went outside and got my stuff back together and went inside and finished it. So. That was kind of neat.
Now, besides booby traps and things like that, did you guys actually did you ever have any direct contact with the VC or the NVA?
Face to face, no. Off to the distance, yes. Close up, no, but they were always a distance.
Okay.
So,
Alright, well now it's telling me that I need to run out of time, so
okay.
what we'll do is we'll pause. Alright, so we were just talking about enemy contact and how in the field, there was never really anything that was close quarters. However, there were Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army was operating in your guys' area. Now, aside from the guy that tripped the booby trap but wasn't significantly wounded, did your unit ever take any casualties?
Yes. They were minor casualties. Um, they weren't enough to send them back home, or enough to take them or send them to Cameron Bay or who knows, Saigon, and patch them up, or send them to a different unit that it wouldn't be, and that way they could finish their tour without being in harm's way, so to speak.
Right.
When we would go through town and a caravan, have you seen sharp sniper yet?
No, I haven't.
Well, I have always talked about if a 10-year-old kid comes up to your car or your truck and is asking for something or trying to give you something, you don't know what that kid's got. And you tell him to get away. Doesn't get away. And you've got a truckload of soldiers in the back end. Like 25, 30. And there's the driver and you, plus the 30 in the back. You don't take the chance. Of that 10-year-old kid having a grenade or being wired. What are your choices? Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the nature of trying to fight a war in a really highly populated area.
And you do what you have to do.
Now, did you guys have a lot of contact with the Vietnamese civilians or with the ARVN units at all?
We had some contact with Arvin, but the less we had to do with them, the better. Because they were for shit. You know? They didn't do, as the saying goes, they were as worthless as tits on a boar hog. There were the Montagnards, who probably considered themselves completely different than Vietnamese. They lived in the highlands, and they didn't care who was fighting, just leave them the fuck alone. You know, it's
Now, my understanding is that the Montagnards were more pro-American than they were pro.
anything. Yeah. They just, choppers, gunners used to take pot shots at water buffalo. And and then it started costing the US government big money.
Right.
So they quit doing it. Because shit rolls downhill. So these guys that were shooting are starting to pay for that stuff. And then the Vietnamese were claiming their buffalo was shot. And what they were doing is passing this buffalo to their neighbor. And saying, my buffalo was shot too. The same damn buffalo. But yeah, there are some things that you regret. And there are some things that, like I say, there's a lot of things that radar got away with. We had a lieutenant who was a dick. And he wanted a combat, he wasn't signing anybody's combat infantry badge because they hadn't seen any combat. Which, you get the combat infantry badge, that's more money. And he kept kicking them back to me, has not seen combat. So I had a stack of them like this that I just kept them. Well, after he was in country about 8 weeks, he wrote out orders for himself to get a combat infantry badge.
Oh.
I looked at that and I says, you want me to fill this out and run this through? He said, yeah. I said, okay. So I grabbed this nice pile, put his on top. He says, you gotta sign these all, then I'll let them through. So you trying to be a smart ass? I says, no. I says, you haven't seen any combat. And I says, if you read it, it says in a combat zone. All of Vietnam is a combat zone. So you have the choice. We either play by what you want to do or what the rules say. You're pissed off and signed this and then end up signing probably 150 other ones. And then I got along with people up in brigade really well. They used to do favors for each other. They would come down and check out things. And I used to have this nice carved wooden box on my desk. And inside this box, I had these harassment grenades. Some of them were like CS, gas grenades.
Tear gas, yeah.
And some of them were small frag grenades. And these guys, brigades, these guys were from payroll and personnel. And they came over. He says, I really would like to shoot him. This guy was so bad. And I said, why can't you shoot him? He says, he's being such a dick. He says, he's into everybody's shit. He just got there, and nobody could stand him all right. And I pushed this box over a little closer to him. And he says, what's this? I says, I don't know. You probably have to look inside. And I says, exactly what we need. They took what they needed, pushed it back over. His room was just off center of the staircase, went downstairs. They tied a piece of kicked up string across the steps. They threw in a small frag grenade just to get his attention. Then they threw in a CS grenade.
Okay.
And this guy came out. He couldn't see. He was choking. He was puking. And going out, he hits this cord and goes down the steps. Broken arm. And everybody's just sitting there laughing. And he ended up being moved to some other battalion company. And they thanked me. If you ever need a favor, just let us know. Well, I work closely with the medics, and we had this lifer sergeant that works with the medics, and the medics they are a different breed when in the service. It's just, it goes back to MASH, it's,
Yes.
they don't operate under the same circumstances or the same set of rules that everybody else does.
Right.
We had a black GI come in, and he had a cyst just above his junk. And the doctor wanted me to come in. and look at it. And I said, whoa. I says, I've never seen this there before. He says, well, he says, it's a syphilitic cyst. And the doctor really is, I don't want to say he's prejudiced, but he's prejudiced of people that don't use enough sense to use a condom. And he says to the guy, he says, been in town, huh? The guy says, well, yeah, huh? Why? He says, well, I know I've been in town because you've been dipping. So I don't know how much she charged you, but I hope it was worth it. He says, you've got a syphilitic cyst here. He says, it's got to be drained and you're going to have to take a lot of shots of penicillin. He says, I knew she was too damn cheap. He says, you want me to get rid of that? He said, well, hell yeah. This doctor was smiling from ear to ear. He sat there and he shaved. He says, come in here, Frank. He says, I may need your help. Shaved him. No cream, no nothing. Just and then he sat there and started to squeeze this all together. And this guy was it had to hurt. I mean, it had to hurt bad. And he's sitting there and he's sitting there and he's working this. And this thing is going like this. And he gets it all together. He says, okay, Frank, hand me that syringe. I looked around, and the only thing he has on the table is like an animal syringe. Was this big around, about that long, and it had a needle like that. I mean, as big as a pinhead. And he looks at this guy, and he says, I want you to know, this is going to hurt. And he says, okay, so Frank, he says, I want you to hold his hands down. I don't want to be anybody. Hold his hands down. So he's grabbing a hold of this thing, and he's pinching the shit out of it. I mean, this guy is working pinching. He takes a syringe and he goes, this guy screamed and then passed out. And the doctor sits there and just sucks everything out of this. I mean, I was getting sick to my stomach. He says, you know what? It deserves him right. He starts laughing. He says, we're not through yet. Got to do it again.
So, oh no, go on.
I had a good time with the medics. The second time I got high with the medics, they had some good stuff, and this is one time when we had incoming casualties, and they were all pretty straight except for me. They kept giving me this shit. They said, okay, I'm going to push your head inside your body, in between your shoulders. And they kept doing this. Kept doing, you know, just on like this. And I says, oh my God, I won't be able to get it out. I can't get it out. Yeah.
talked about that kind of, I mean, not quite fragging, but sending a message to that lieutenant, and that there were discipline issues with soldiers going into town and not using common sense. Were those isolated incidents, or was that kind of the general atmosphere by this point, where people were getting sick of the war?
People were sick of the war. I mean, GIs were just... The motor pool would go into town, and they would pick up a couple of hookers. They would bring them to the medics and have them checked out to make sure that there wasn't anything physically wrong. And then the medics would have first shot for free. And then they'd give them to the medics for the rest of the night. You know, I think it was $5 a crack.
Wow.
And that's how that's how the medics made their money. Well, one of the medics was a friend, somebody I got to know real well because he would drive me in and out of town. And he had a 7 and 7 coming up, which means 7 days leave, 7 days R&R. And he wanted to go back to Detroit, Michigan for 7 and 7. I says, that's not gonna give you much time. I says, that's barely will give you a week if you're lucky, depending on your flights, you know. But if that's what you want, go for it. Well, I got a long distance phone call from Detroit, person to person, from Detroit. He says, I got to the airport, got to the boarding, got to the boarding line. He says, my wife and 2 kids were crying, and the boys were saying, don't leave us, Daddy, don't leave us, Daddy. And he says, I just couldn't leave, not then. He says, is there anything, any way, anything you can do? And he says, well, tell you what, I'll give you 10 days, 10 days more. This is the day you're going to be here at my desk, no later than noon. If you're 1 minute past noon, you're going to jail. You're AWOL. And I won't do anything to stop it. You know what? That's that 14, that's 24 days. Now, you fuck me over. I says, you only do that once. I said, okay, you got 10 days. Oh, thank you, man, thank you, thank you, thank you. 12 noon. 10 days later, he he was standing in front of my desk. Yeah, I did a lot of favors for a lot of people.
So, for the most part, I mean, morale wasn't good, but at the same time, within the ranks, there was cooperation amongst the soldiers.
God, there was. I don't want to keep talking about the times that I, was high, but there was one time when sitting out back of the medics. Make yourself come.
Oh, no, it's fine.
I was smoking and saw this green, this most fiber green. But I can't even describe how the color of green was. It was just captivating on the snake. So I got a stick and I started playing with it. About, I don't want to say, maybe 45 seconds I was playing with the snake. All of a sudden, out of the blue, some big bastard comes and tackles me, throws me to the ground. I asked, what the fuck are you doing? Why did you do that for? He says, if that would have bitten you, you would have never made it home. Oh. It was a bamboo viper. He says, it's called a three-stepper. 3 steps and you're dead. And I just, it was one of those things that you don't realize where you're at until something like that
Until
happens.
that happens, yeah.
And they went and got it. They got a shovel, held it down, and got some Novocaine, shot it in its head, and got it so it wouldn't move. It was kind of incapacitated. Went and got a knife, cut its head off. Got a toothpick and propped open its jaws and put it in formaldehyde. Its fangs were that long. And it was, it really did, it scared the shit out of me. It's like, don't you ever think of doing that again. I have to say, I had more fun in the service than I did bad times. God, we used to get the officers clubhouse and get their beer and booze and have parties in there because they were usually gone to Cameron. Cameron Bay was a resort. If I would, they were pulling guard duty in Cameron Bay, which I didn't know at the time, because that's where I was going to go, and I didn't know what the hell it was. And I took the typing job, but going to Cameron Bay was like, they water skied and they laid out in the sun, and of course they did pulled guard duty or went out in the bush and shit, but you could have worked on a can.
Now, you said that when you arrived in Vietnam, it was kind of, I'm going to use a more diplomatic term, kind of dilapidated.
It was.
And besides venomous snakes, what were living conditions like for GIs?
Boy Scout?
Couple years.
Did you ever go to Boy Scout summer camp?
No, I didn't.
I had it made. For me, I had my own hooch. Nobody else did. They usually slept in what was more like a barracks with maybe 10 guys. And my hooch was probably see where the cupboards are right there
Yep.
to this wall here. Maybe not quite that long.
So about.
I'd say maybe to the just a little bit past the refrigerator and not quite as wide as this, which was a good size room.
So about for the people who can't see it, it's about a 10 by 10 room.
Yeah,
Maybe a little big, a
a
little,
little
bit
bit
bigger.
bigger, but
Yeah.
and I had my own bed, I had my own setup, I had my own stereo. I had it all. And this is something I got it done. The first night I got in there, I had everything laid up really cool. And sprayed for roaches, right? So I'm spraying everything. I saw one on the ceiling. I said, okay, get him off there. So I sprayed the ceiling. I'm laying in bed. All of a sudden, I hear, get these. Never thought these roaches would crawl on the ceiling and you get into this repellent and then drop. I was getting them things dropping on you all night long. And don't want to do that again. Then there was another night. I'm in this private room, and then there's the barracks are outside of this private room. And I hear the screen door opening and closing. Nobody's supposed to be in there. I get up and look. Nobody there. Go back to bed. 10, 15 minutes later, it opens and closes again. Couldn't figure out what's happening, who's coming in this room and closing, or opening and closing this door. You know, where did they go? Come to find out, it's a rat. This rat was so big. It was as big as a small dog. If you can visualize a Coca-Cola wooden case,
Yeah.
its nose was in one quarter and its hindquarters were in the other opposite corner at the other end. So I would say it was 15 inches long, 16 inches long. It was good size, it was huge. And it was as round as a pipe. I mean, it was huge, and it's
A big rat.
It scared the shit out of me just looking at it. Well, you paid these Vietnamese to catch the rats. Well, they eat them. And they caught this rat and they were happy. They were happy. And they came to me and showed me, and we did good, huh? We did good. Yeah, you did wonderful.
I'm sure you were happy about it too.
And I says, these doors were heavy, and I could not believe, well, after you seen the rat, you could believe it, but a rat would be that strong to open that screen door and come in there and go down a hole in the floor, go back around, open the door again, go down the, yeah, got everything taken care of there. Had a plate rail put up around my room. Because of doing favors for people, I had every kind of booze I could imagine on this plate rail. I mean, booze that I've never even heard of. And open it. And I mean, there's just, I didn't expect it. People wanted a favor, wanted me to, put a good word in for them or something. That, what do you drink? Well, sometimes I like vodka. Here's a half gallon of Kettle One. Oh, yeah, okay, that'll work. What do you like? What do you feel like drinking? I haven't had any scotch for a while. They bring me, Cutty Sark, half gallon of Cutty Sark. It's just, it was ridiculous.
It's that kind of thing.
Go ahead.
Perks. I mean, besides marijuana and alcohol, we're getting into the early 70s now. You're starting to talk about, that's when heroin and cocaine started to come into the country. Did you notice any problems
Oh, yeah.
with that? Yeah.
Heroin was the biggest problem that they had in Vietnam. We had put a soldier on the plane 3 times. 3 times he got off. He was not sending his money back home to his wife and kids. He had a habit that took his paycheck. He sold everything he had in Vietnam. He would never leave Vietnam. He was getting a pure high. That wasn't cut by any, I mean, what did they say? It was 98% pure, 95% pure. I mean, it was pretty potent, and the only thing that, when it was that pure, it was easier to kick because you're not kicking everything else that it's cut with.
Right.
So, yeah, the 4th time we put him on a plane, we had to handcuff him to the plane to make sure that he
Didn't come back.
didn't get off again.
Now, I mean, you talked about working with medics. Did they ever have any guys come in that were overdosing or anything like that?
Not in our unit in headquarters, but the other companies did, and they would bring them to our unit, and they would just ship them off to a hospital because you're not set up for it.
Right, you don't really have that detox capability.
No, so they'd set them up and send them either to Cameron Bay or Saigon. But it was, heroin was, they do skag joints, which is marijuana laced with opium. And the worst the worst soldiers for that were gunners on helicopters, on choppers. They would get and I don't know what the reason was, but they seemed to be the ones that were the most strung out, and always end up having to go to detox or have the most problems. And I don't know why that was, or I can't say.
It's just one of those things. Another, I guess it's another, I guess the word would be kind of a stereotype or not, I'm not sure, but is that there were, especially as you get into the 70s and in an area like the rear, there were a lot of racial tensions. Did you notice anything like that?
There were, yeah. In fact, I was, because of my personality, and I went to a predominantly black high school. I kind of chaired a racial, and I put it down on my notes, a racial intervention or racial
Liaison.
type thing.
Yeah.
Because it was, a lot of people didn't become prejudiced until they went into the service. And a lot of that was because the blacks themselves would isolate themselves and become their own unit, and then have nothing to do with the white guys. And it usually, I can't say it was the case out in the field, but when we stood down, when they stood down and were back at base camp, the same people that were buddies out in the field would not have anything to do with each other back in base camp. And I said I couldn't understand it. I says, I don't know why we have this problem. Why are we buddies out in the field? And we can talk to each other, shoot the shit, tell jokes. You would call me nigger, I could call you nigger. And then all of a sudden we get back here and neither one of us exist anymore to each other. And I says, where the racial issues come in, I don't understand. It's like we become two different people. And he says, look around you. We're all in the same fucking boat. You know what? If we were getting shot at, I'm not gonna let somebody shoot you because you're black. I don't understand this prejudice. I was brought up with more blacks than there are here. Never had a prejudice issue.
Yeah.
This black guy says to me, "You ever date a black woman?" "Yeah." "No, you haven't." "Yeah, I did. I dated a Mexican woman. Dated a Chinese woman. Dated a Greek woman."
Alright.
I mean, do you want a list? Do you want to know their names? I mean, so what's... You've dated a white woman, right? "Well, kind of." I said, "Either you did or you didn't." It's not kind of.
Not a lot of in between there.
So I said, "So what is the big deal?" And we went on through this until I left, but it was a lot of racial tension. That's where the blacks came up with their secret handshakes. That came from Vietnam.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that definitely adds up to what I've heard in other interviews too, where in the field, okay, we're in this together. But when you get to the rear, these social conventions come back, and it's like, well, you have to go over here, we have to go over here. For whatever reason that happened. Now we're kind of we carried you through. You had the operations on the field. You did the clerical work. Now it says here on your bio sheet, you got in on your discharge paper. It said that you got there in about October 1970, and then it says that you left in February of 1970. Well, excuse me, October of 1971, and you left in February of 72. Now that's a lot shorter than the usual 12-month tour.
Mm-hmm.
What's the story with that? All right, so you're just explaining to me off camera how this kind of worked, and it was basically a matter of there was a decision to come down that we were going to start pulling troops out, and part of that was because of the fact that Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces were kind of starting to spill over the DMZ and surrounding northern American positions. So you'd be in the process of going home. Now, how do you get out of Vietnam and get back to the States?
By orders. Once your orders are filled, you either go to Saigon or Cam Ranh Bay, and they process your orders. You wait for a commercial plane to come in and pick up enough GIs to fill the plane. That will fly you back to Seattle or San Francisco. We flew back, and the same thing happens going out. You have an escorted flight out, and I don't know how long they flew with us, but they flew with us for a while, and as soon as they veered away, everybody in the plane clapped. You knew that you were pretty safe. We stopped at Okinawa, which was kind of cool, this little strip of land that there's nothing there but a PX store And I bought Lynn and I these kimono robes. So I think that's the only thing that I bought. No, I also bought us our crystal when I was in Vietnam, because at the PX there, I got a PX book, and our crystal that we had for our wedding, they had in the PX book. And not that it was real expensive, but we got everything. We got water glasses, wine glasses, sherbet glasses, what do they call them? Cordial glasses, all of them. Everything that was 96 pieces of glassware. And it was, we got them for like $110 or something like that. Here, the glasses are like $7 each to $12 each, something like that, in the variants. I says, take back what we got, you know, because we didn't get them all. I says, take back what we got. This is the number. I had ripped out the page. Look at this is what it is. Order it through the PX and get everything. So we do. We got them put away because we don't use them. You know, it's one of those things. If we ever wanted to, we got them. You know?
Yeah, there you go. There you go. So where did you land in the U.S.?
We landed in Seattle again.
Landed in Seattle.
And which was weird then because it was Seattle to Chicago, but there was no layover time. They redlined me in Seattle. What the hell? They redlined me because there was something wrong with the dates. And I said, I thought for sure that, something's gonna send me back,
Yeah.
So I went there and I went to personnel, and I told them to call Vietnam or get through to Vietnam personnel and talk to such and such a person, and you can maybe straighten it out with them. And they did, and they says, well, we will do that. In the meantime, my plane came to fly me to Chicago, and the next flight was to Kalamazoo. So instead of flying into Grand Rapids, I flew into Kalamazoo.
Okay.
And my parents were at the airport at Kalamazoo with Linda, and I drove home.
Now, in your stopping in Seattle, Chicago, and then Kalamazoo, you hear a lot about Vietnam veterans running into harassment from protesters. Did you personally ever run into anything like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. When I was up at Ferris State University, the veterans, because a lot of veterans took advantage of the GI Bill, they were frowned upon. The Vets Club, they had their own Vets Club. Instead of a fraternity, they had the Vets Club. And as it was, most of the people that were in the Vets Club were a little older than the rest of the students. And we're more serious about, in one hand, they were more serious about getting things done, but on the same token, they've, been through it, and they didn't give a shit, they didn't take shit either,
Right.
And I think what you've seen, this Afghanistan and Iraq and all this Mideast, is the way that we are treating the veterans that are coming back now is a result of the way the veterans were treated when they came back from Vietnam. I think the veterans from the Vietnam era want to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Exactly.
It's amazing, the same people that called us baby killers are the same people that when they see a Vietnam sticker on your bumper or your license plate, they say thank you. And these are the same people that call you baby killers. It's amazing. But, we weren't gonna let that happen to the veterans that are coming back now. And we have more veterans that are coming back wounded and dismembered. They have this program where they say send $19 a month to help the wounded warriors. It's great, it's wonderful. But the government should pay those people. It shouldn't come out of the nation, individual people out in the nation to pay for it. The government owes these guys, big time. Not the citizens.
Now, did you have any problems readjusting to civilian life after you came home?
My language, I did. Yeah, I had to readjust. The first time I was home was at my parents' table. And I'm the oldest of 7. So there's 18 years difference between me and my youngest sister. So when I sitting at the table and I looked at the potatoes, I said, pass me the fucking potatoes. My mother wasn't real pleased. And I said, well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. I says, please pass me those potatoes. Yeah, it took a while. You had to get that language because you got used to every other word in Vietnam was, the F word, so.
Yeah. Here we're gonna change tapes real quick. Alright, so we were just talking about having a few minor problems readjusting to civilian life with language being used and all that. But you come home, And what do you do next? What do you do now?
Well, came home, was married, really didn't have a place to stay. So we lived with my in-laws for a little bit and went to school up at, well, before that, I guess I worked at Farrell's Ice Cream Parlor that used to be at Woodland Mall. And I guess I wanted to have a job. And I could have collected unemployment, but I needed to have to do something. I needed to get back into the groove of society, so to speak. And so I worked there. And then after that, I went to Ferris. Went to Ferris for a couple of years. Didn't work for me as well as I thought it would. I'm the kind of person that learns by doing and not so much by the book. But anyway, came back home and stayed with Linda's parents and started working for Linda's dad. And which was okay. But he did not want to show any partiality or nepotism, so he kind of went the other way. He was just a little bit more hard on me than he was other people. And I really didn't work for him. I worked for him through another company that he was part owner of. So I ended up going to work for General Motors, where my dad worked. He said, they're hiring. Why don't you come down and put your application in? So I did, and that's where I was for 31 years.
All right.
And, it's one of those things when, if it's not something you want, and it's not something that makes you happy, getting up in the morning to go and do, then you're in the wrong job. And I don't care what it is. If you want to pump gas and that's what makes you happy, then go pump gas. And if you become the best there is at it, you'll find a way to make money. To sit and suffer and do a job that you hate for 30 years or more, you are not doing yourself or your family any service. I was diagnosed with PTSD. And I think, I think I've handled it pretty well. I don't think I let it get the better part of me. I'm the the kind of guy that likes to go out and have a good time, and and I appreciate my nieces and nephews probably more than I do sometimes my brothers and sisters, so I love to have them around. I think that they're a grin. I can't wait till deer camp comes around now. Especially now that my nephew Adam is old enough to drink legally.
Are you, another question is, are you involved in any kind of veterans groups?
When I got out, I was. I was involved with the veterans group at Ferris. I was involved with the veterans group at General Motors. But then there was a conflict of interest. I became a salaried employee, and most of the veterans were hourly employees. So it there was conflict of interest. So.
Right. But were you ever involved with like the American Legion or anything like that?
No.
No.
I should get involved. I think one of the greatest things that we have is the volunteers at Ann Street Veterans Home. To have somebody go out there and talk to the veterans is a great thing. Some of these guys that are there because they have no place else to go. Are there because they have no family, or are there because the family doesn't want them. And, every year we go and get something from the tree at Christmas time and do it a little something. But it's kind of sad when you see the facility and see how I think we can do so much more in a city this size.
On the last general question that we usually ask is, what are your reflections on this, on your service, and your time spent in Vietnam? What have you taken away from that, good or bad?
I think I said this to you before. I have no regrets of my service, none whatsoever. It was a learning experience. Especially, coming from Western Michigan, which is a bubble in itself. It's like, there was so much out there that I never realized or knew how the world actually ran, socially. I can remember in Louisville, Kentucky, first time I was there, I saw 4 black gay people, and I didn't know blacks were gay. I didn't know I didn't think it was part of their culture. They just didn't exist. you know, you're black. You can't be gay. You know, you're black. And it was just, and I mean, these guys were flamers. It's like, I wish my wife could walk like that. They were just, I had to run over and get these guys I was with to come in. You gotta come and see this. You gotta come and see this. Yeah. It was the first time I've ever seen where the hookers drove around and the Johns stood on the corners. It was reversal.
This is just a real, I guess in a lot of ways, kind of a culture shock for you.
It was the Army. I mean, sometimes when we're not on camera, I'll tell you stories.
All right, fair enough. Fair enough. Well, you know, from what you have told us as on camera, it makes for a very interesting story. Thank you for coming out to be interviewed today, and thank you for your service.
Thank you.